like serfs, okay? Like you do now, like you would now, right? Because they understood the relationship, right? They understood the due deference to the office versus the actual relationship between the offices, okay? But now, I mean, you know, you bring president, if you brought a president of the United States into any county, the Treasury Department, the Secret Service takes over. The federal government just takes over. They control your airspace, they control your land, your ground, your routes. Sheriff gets to say nothing. Because of this entire invert, that would never have been tolerated 100 years ago. The president would have been told never to return to the county if his treasury agents acted like they do today. I mean, and that's where you have to understand how far we've gone down this, and how successful in turning the entire flow of power in this country upside down has become. And that's why the sheriff is extremely key to restoring these relationships in conjunction with the citizens of his county. He can't do this alone. It's because we have to all be there with him, right? And we start by the formation of the cities committees. You know, the first line of defense is working with the reserve auxiliary and posse, whatever formation that the sheriff uses to help assist in citizen involvement in his organization and with his deputies. Okay, my dad was a posse volunteer when I was a kid with the Los Angeles County Posse, and later on with the Boise County Posse up in Idaho. The auxiliaries, reserves, and posses are a very important tool, and they're an important tool to return something. You notice the word that's missing here? Reserve, auxiliary, and posse. Do you notice the word that's missing here?
National Guard.
Militia.
Close.
Militia.
Militia. Because how scary that word is, and misunderstood that word is. Okay? What we're really talking about here, if truth be known, in parentheses over here off to the side, any one of those things actually used to be called the militia, the citizens' militia. They evolved into these things through various mechanisms. But it used to be, but now the word militia, and again, it's another one of these terms that is so misunderstood in current American history or relativistic history versus actual history, and what was to evolve here. You know, I hear all the time. And even militia members themselves, a lot of times they don't even know the difference between the organized, the unorganized, and how that relates to the general versus the special versus the private militias. You know, the ones that everybody's scared of and gives everything a bad name are the private militias. Well, those in no way have anything to do with the militia that was defined under the Second Amendment or in state statute or anywhere else. It was only dealt with the general and the general, which related to the unorganized, or the special, which related to the organized militia, or what now is known as the reserve, or the National Guard. Again, this is a whole other area of education and training that's just been lost to most Americans, and who now believe in the soundbite world that the private exclusive militias formed by things like the Aryans, nations, and that's the militia. Those are militias, and they in no way have anything to do with the actual militias that were set up and formed with the country. Yes?
There's a group called Revitalize the Second Amendment, RT2A.com, and it's kind of based on the books of Dr. Edwin Vieira,
Right.
who's close to Ron, big Ron Paul guy. But he goes through like the militias and the historical context, and I just wonder if you know, if you're
Yeah, it's a great resource, and Dr. Vieira is a great resource and reference for a lot of things. My only problem with him is, you know what, he really needs to be less verbose.
Yeah.
He writes a lot of words to get across the.
What do you think that group RT2A is?
Yeah, when he wrote the last one on the Second Amendment, it was 2,500 pages. I said, you know what, I'm not buying that one.
But you think that's a good group, that RT2A?
Yes.
Check that out.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a good, any group that bases their sourcing on actual research and firm educational foundation usually turn out to be pretty good groups, and that the RT2A is in that vein. So Yeah, I actually don't recommend anybody buy Dr. Vieira's last book on the Second Amendment, because you'll never get through it anyway. But, you know, but I do appreciate all of the work that he's done
Yeah.
in the area. I just wish he'd be more condensed. I mean,
Yeah.
like this book, I ended the draft at 145,000 words, and to get down to this was 105,000 words. And the 35,000, or the 40,000 I dropped on the floor, that'll go into volume 2, but like I said, I went the other way. I just kept
Yeah.
trying to shorten and condense, because it's
Right.
already dense enough as it is,
Yeah.
and lengthy enough. And that's what Dr. Vieira has to learn, is how to condense his ideas. Because they're great ideas, he does wonderful research, but people just can't read that much information.
Yeah.
It's not their life
Right.
to consume his life of research.
Right.
He needs to be able to condense. Citizens committees, formalized citizens committees, as I point out in chapter 17, is extremely important. If you can formalize it through the Republican Central Committee, if you can bring them along, get that kind of education, or the Republican and the Democratic Central Committees in Mesa County, that would be wonderful. These are not Republican, Democratic, one or the other issues. These are constitutional issues that cross all boundaries. It's not libertarian, it's not Republican, it's not Democratic. These are constitutional principle issues that cross all boundaries. So these citizens committees, you know, the ones that have done it, I commended them, but I say, you know what? As soon as you can, you should get as many other people that are not Republicans or not conservatives involved to come and help educate them to understand that these issues are important to all citizens and need to be practiced by all citizens. Yes, sir.
People are trying to put together that sort of local groups that
Yeah.
are committees.
And in all these issues, I stress that more and more and more all the time. That this is not exclusive to one ideology. We got to move away from this. The problem we have is we have too much ideology and too little principle. So citizens committees and organizing are very important, but you have to start somewhere and expand outward from there. And if you start from a group like this, but the more you formalize and work directly, and that's one of the 9 questions for the sheriff's candidates that I have on the list, is will you work with a citizens committee to help further educate yourself and your deputies into being a constitutional sheriff? And commit to that and actually start a process and work it through with the reserve auxiliary posse, whatever they are, with the deputies, to make sure that they understand this effort is not to conflict with the sheriff's office. It's to assist and help them, okay? While it's helping the citizens to protect and defend our rights, it's helping the sheriff's department to protect and defend their power and their rights, or powers in those rights. See? It's a two-way street here. These are not issues of conflict. These are issues that are that in a community that actually works in a republic, operates in these ways to help each other and help ourselves as communities to be better communities, and to protect ourselves as citizens better and our rights and liberties and the land we live on. And that leads you to number 3, bringing the sheriff into the loop, and how you do that. I know from my experience across multiple states, the sheriffs, some sheriffs, they open up their arms and say, come on in. There's a large number of sheriffs that you can get the hell out of my office. We have nothing to talk about, right? And of course, you find, you know, the problem is education. They have no idea what you're talking about. And number 2, they're scared of what you're talking about because they don't understand it. So they're scared. And so their natural reaction is to push you away. Okay? And again, that's when, you know, I in all these things, in all the years, one thing that I found is the best way to look at all of these, potential conflicts is the same thing that I learned when I was spent several years in the Far East working for the intel agencies and looking at various martial arts, right? Some martial arts are offensive martial arts. You attack, okay? The way you defend is by attacking. But there's certain martial arts that the way you defend is completely passive and neutral, right? You meet and deflect. Meet and deflect. You never allow, you never absorb, you meet and deflect, and you never push back, right? And what you find out is those actually work the best. Because what happens is your adversary expends all of his energy while you meet and deflect. He doesn't hurt you, but then he falls down on the floor exhausted, and that's when you put your foot on his neck and say, submit. Okay? The way to beat, if you have a conflicting adversary, the way is not to try and beat them up. The way is to exhaust them, okay, and deflect their negative energy until they fall on the floor and submit, and realize that they've exhausted themselves. They've taken all the fight out of themselves. But you're going to have sheriffs, and I know that, strangely enough, I have a very reluctant one in my own county. And he's been tremendously difficult because he probably gets 50% of his budget from the feds, because we live in a rural county and with lots of national. And you know, the last thing he touted, hey, I just busted 3 grow operations in the national forest, 5,000 plants, 4,000 plants, you know, and I was part of the interagency task force, and I had the DEA and the FBI and all these, and money and equipment and all this stuff was flowing in, and I just looked at him and I said, and you wouldn't even have those grow operations if marijuana was legalized in this state. Those grow operations wouldn't even exist, so what a waste of time that was. Right? And if Colorado can get their act together, right, I mean, instead of implementing it the way they are, they might find, you know, I've heard multiple times, multiple places, that actually a lot of illegal dealers are doing better than ever because of all the taxes, regulation, permitting, and all the stuff that's been applied to the retail outlets. That legal pot is twice as expensive as illegal pot, and they're making. And so they're you know, any market that is effectively prohibitive in its functioning still creates a black market. And that's what's going on right now. They've made, you know, since they just couldn't work with it. They had to try everything possible, you know, between the, up in the taxes. They've created a white market that, yes, right now is making some revenue as well, but they've also actually enhanced the black market by keeping the white market so restrictive through the permitting and the taxing policy. And so, what I've been recommending in a lot of other states is watch what happens in Colorado for the experiment. Because until this experiment actually works its way through, you're not really going to know the outcome. Let's not duplicate Colorado's mistakes. Because the first thing that other states are going to go for is, man, look at all the money they're making. We can make that too. And they're going to make exactly the same wrong mistakes, where if they really wanted to effectively reduce both the potency and the incidence and everything that came with the illegal market, then they need to actually get rid of the illegal market by stopping a prohibitive, trying to create a prohibitive white market right behind it that still enhances the black market.
So would that be done by decriminalizing instead of legalizing?
Yeah, it might be that decriminalization in this country is the better path to go. Okay, rather than legalization. Decriminalization first, and in fact for a long time that was the recommended course, was decriminalization then legalization. Because if you just take, well, it's what happened after Prohibition ended. If you look at when New York ended their, which effectively ended nationwide prohibition, when New York ended their enforcement of all alcohol laws, which effectively ended it, you saw what happened, right, is you had every reaction under the sun, because when they took the brakes off, some states freaked out. They go, we can't take the brakes off all at once. My goodness, go to from full prohibition to full legalization after 14 years of prohibition, right? And look what we've had with illegal drugs. Almost a century, or 70 to 80 years of prohibition. Now you take the brakes completely off? No, you might, if you stepped into it over 80 years, you might need to step out of it over at least a decade and do it through decriminalization and legalization. Any question over here? Okay. So, I think that kind of, you know, we can cover the sheriff a little more after lunch, but I think that kind of brings us up to the point of understanding, we'll come back to other state powers and nullification and those things after lunch, and that's basically the last segment, so. Any more last questions? Yes?
I just had a comment, it's something that I've noticed in my role since World War II era that I was born shortly after. Sheriffs that were elected to protect the people of the county considered the people of the county to be their backup, particularly veterans. But now it seems that it's kind of turned, and if you're a citizen, you're a civilian.
Right.
It's kind of got this little, you know, you're sort of the enemy.
Well, that's the whole other problem with the militarization of the police function, or the policing function, law enforcement function. When I talk about it in the chapter, I very distinctly describe where we've taken what were peace officer, the peace officer tradition, and we've turned it into the law enforcement tradition now, which is an entirely different distinction than the peace officer function or role, right? The law enforcement role is a bureaucratic function that is only interested in technical enforcement of the law, not in maintaining the peace and security of the county or the district, right? That was the old, quote unquote, old form of what law enforcement was about, was the peace officer role. And that's where the problem has really occurred in that distinction, because that's where you have policing authority engaging in the wrong role in the community. Yes.
Has Air Force One been in Arapahoe County?
I'm sorry? Sheriff or President?
Yeah, Sheriff Arapahoe.
I don't think he's ever showed up there since the little set-to starts between them.
I'm just curious how that does play out, because
Yeah, well, I don't think he's confused about it, Sheriff Arpaio himself, I don't think he's confused about it. So that might be interesting, yeah, what would happen if he did show, but I don't know, since their little set-to start, I don't think that he's actually showed up in
case study there.
Maricopa County, no. Yes,
Well, me as a person, in the decades that I've been involved in this, I think you're making a large mistake by letting the progressives sidetrack us into this liberal conservative argument, when that's not the true argument. The true argument goes back to Mulberry versus Madison, which declares the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, and anything contrary to it is null and void and unenforceable. And so instead of getting sucked into this conversation of conservative and liberal, we should be back on the point of law. It doesn't make a difference if you're liberal or if you're a conservative. If you're breaking the law, you're out. I mean, you need to be dealt with. You know, don't try to say, well, if the liberals are in the liberal court or this or that. If the court's breaking the law with word and definition, I mean, I think that's a point that we should definitely be going down. And then the sheriff has room to deal with these problems, like the IRS coming in without the proper documentation because they don't have it, because, you know, we all know that, is because they're outside the law. So if you deal with it, I was stopped by a patrolman one time when I was back in my 20s for speeding, and I was talking like a Dutch uncle trying to get out of that ticket, saying I changed the size of my tires and everything on my pickup. And that patrolman said, I don't care if you even have a speedometer in that pickup. What I was concerned about you breaking the speed limit. And I think that's what we need to keep our point of view, is that you're breaking the law. I don't care what political party, what Democrat, Republican, what conservative, liberal, if you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law.
except the problem becomes is, what is the law?
Well, with word and definition, we all got dictionaries and words.
Yeah, but, okay, but if I have a law prohibiting the sale, use, or possession of marijuana, in any case and in any terms, it might be a legal law, but is it a lawful law?
Exactly, yeah.
And so you have to define, you know, or take any of 100 laws that, quote unquote, laws that we now have on the books that define no actual injury to a person, that are statutory only in nature.